It was 57 years ago in 1968 when Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King gave his mountaintop speech in Memphis, Tennessee. He was 39 years old. He had been a major leader in the civil rights movement that had so many successes to that point. And he was in Memphis to support the sanitation workers' strike. And at the end of his speech, he said, like anyone, he said, I would like to live a long life, but I'm not concerned about that now. I only want to do God's will. And God has allowed me to go up to the mountaintop. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And I'm so happy tonight. I'm not afraid about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the coming of the glory of the Lord. And the very next day, Martin Luther King was shot dead by a sniper while he was standing on the balcony of his hotel. The reason his speech was so prophetic was because he was identifying the civil rights movement with the Exodus from Egypt in the Bible. How God brought the people out of slavery in Egypt through the Red Sea and wandered in the desert and eventually brought them into the promised land. And he was identifying the civil rights movement as being the same thing that God was doing. And our Old Testament lesson today is a dialogue between Moses and God when God was calling Moses out of the burning bush. God says to Moses, I have observed the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of the taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians and to bring them up to that good land, good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So come, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And Moses says to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God says, I will be with you. So the whole book of Exodus in the Bible is the story of how Moses confronted the Pharaoh and said, let my people go, and how he led them out of bondage in Egypt through the Red Sea, and how they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Moses never got to the promised land. He was never able to cross the river Jordan. But at the end of his life, he climbed up to the top of Mount Pisgah with his assistants. And he looked out over the plain where Jordan, the river Jordan was, and he could see the promised land from afar. God let him look at it, but God didn't let him enter the promised land. And so that's what Martin Luther King was referring to when he gave his last speech. He was saying that he was like Moses, looking into the future. And he knew that he wouldn't see the results of the civil rights movement himself, but his people would. So he felt at peace with his death whenever it might come. And it came the very next day. In our reading, God says, I have heard the misery of my people. I have observed their crying. I know their suffering. Pharaoh didn't hear their cries. Pharaoh didn't know their suffering. Pharaoh was the one who caused their suffering, and he didn't hear a thing. Pharaoh was just a privileged bully. He sent his taskmasters out to abuse and harass and exploit the Israelites who were working as slaves. But God hears the misery of his people. God knows their suffering. Throughout the Bible, we hear how God is on the side of the oppressed, on the side of the poor. God hears the cries of the poor, and God cares for the orphans and the widows. Well, Martin Luther King Jr. knew his Bible. He was the son of a Baptist preacher. He was raised in a home where they read the Bible every day. He grew up in the church. He went to seminary. He got his doctorate. And he could see the similarity between the oppressed people of America and the oppressed people in Egypt. I've seen the promised land, he said. I may not get there, but I want you to know that we as a people will get to the promised land. Well, I want to tell you about another civil rights pioneer by the name of Elizabeth Paratrovich. She was a Tlingit woman from southeast Alaska. And in 1945, the Alaska Territorial Legislature was debating a bill that would be an anti-discrimination bill for Alaska. And if passed, this bill would make it illegal to post signs that said, "No natives allowed." So it would allow Native Alaskans to eat in any restaurant, to stay in any hotel, to sit in any theater, and basically be treated like everyone else. So Elizabeth Paratrovich and other Alaska Natives were sitting in the gallery as the senators were debating this bill, and senator after senator stood up to argue against the bill. They said races should remain separate. Integration is going to cause violence. The Native people weren't ready for equality. One senator said he didn't want to sit next to a Native person in a theater because they smelled. And then Senator Alan Shattuck rose to speak. He said, "Who are these people barely out of savagery that want to associate with us whites with 5,000 years of recorded civilization behind us?" And in the back of the gallery, Elizabeth Paratrovich was knitting. She was 33 years old, mother of 3 children, and the president of the Alaska Native Sisterhood. And she was known as a person who had great dignity, great composure, very calm person. And she set her knitting needles down, and she walked up to the front of the legislature. Every eye in the room followed her. She looked right at the men who had insulted her people. And she spoke without raising her voice, without being emotional. She was very controlled. She said, "I would not have expected that I, who am barely out of savagery, would have to remind gentlemen with 5,000 years of recorded civilization behind them of our Bill of Rights." And you could sort of see a shockwave go through the senators. And she went on and she described what it was like to see signs comparing her own people to dogs, to have her children asked why they couldn't go into certain stores, to be treated as unwelcome in the very land that her ancestors had inhabited for thousands of years. And then came the questions from the senators. Oh, can you really expect a law to change people's hearts? Will this law actually stop discrimination? And she said, "Do your laws against larceny and murder prevent those crimes? No law will eliminate crimes, but at least you as legislators can tell the world that you recognize the evil of the present situation and you're doing your best to overcome discrimination." When the vote was taken, it passed 11-5. And Elizabeth Paratrovich lived to see the day when her children could walk down the streets of Juneau without seeing the signs that said, "No natives allowed." Well, Elizabeth Paratrovich and Martin Luther King Jr. recognized the injustice and discrimination in our country, and they worked to bring justice and peace to all people and to respect the dignity of every human being, as it says in our baptismal covenant. In every age, there are forces that are trying to tear us apart, trying to take advantage of the weak and bully the vulnerable. As our reading in Ephesians says, our struggle is not against the enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God and stand firm. So whenever we see the strong bullying the weak, the powerful attacking the poor, and the ruthless bearing down on the helpless, we stand firm for justice, stand firm for the people, stand firm for God.